It is absolutely lovely to be back here. Really, really lovely. And I hope you all enjoy the fact that we got up to lots of rain this morning, which if, is possibly a bit of a stain on Manchester, but maybe not. I did go to one fantastic festival there where it was sunshine all day, but that may have been the exception. I love doing these events for a bunch of reasons. A, because we have such an incredible place here with the Orpheum and upstate. And if it's your first time here, please do check out the programming. Consider becoming a member. I've done events in London, New York, LA, I don't know that I'd be able to do anything on this level as easily and frequently as professionally as we have it here. So we are very, very, very fortunate here, and I'm glad you're all spending money on popcorn and other things. Obviously, books are for sale. And we'll have a Q&A afterwards. We're going to run this probably all the way up to very close to 4 o'clock, just so you have a sense. And other reasons I enjoy doing this, one is that I get to put a band together. And this band I hand curated from Rock Academy students that I thought would be perfect for the individual songs, through to a couple of friends my age. The age range spans from 15 to 60. When I did the math, that's 45 is the age range difference, which is the speed that 7-inch singles rotate at. And I love that because I have a tattoo of a spindle on my arm there. And the Smiths made so many incredible 7-inch singles in the UK. You could not keep up with them at one point. And the other reason I really enjoy doing this is I get to revisit back catalogues and my own books. And I have not really sat and listened to the Smiths for a while. I grew up with them. It's great. It's wonderful. I then wrote a book on them, and that's, at that point, you're listening to the music 24/7 pretty much. And I also don't go back to my books unless I really need to. And on both cases, the music, God, it stands the test of time. It really, really, really does. And I was also actually very happy with the book. I remember at the time feeling like it was 95% of the way there, and that wasn't good enough. And I've actually been reading it back, and I'm actually really, really happy with it. And in the process of doing the book, doing any book, doing lots and lots of interviews. Some people you interview, call them by phone, whatever, you never speak to them again. And in other cases, you develop a couple of friendships along the way. And as a result of doing this book, I kind of did develop different but real friendships with both Johnny Marr and Andy Rourke. And I'd like to dedicate this today to Andy Rourke, to the memory of Andy Rourke. He moved to New York City. We became good friends. He was the most beautiful, humble person. And I kind of suspect if he was still with us, he'd actually be with us, because he did that before with events when the book came out in New York City. And, just watching through this, it's going to be a bit tough to keep remembering he's not with us. But I'm going to start the event by bringing you to the very start of the band. And I will play something, and then what I'm going to say is this is the 4th of February, 1983, and this is the Smiths' third ever gig, and it was filmed. It's at the Hacienda in Manchester.
Hello. We are the Smiths. We are not Smiths. We are the Smiths. These things take time. I'm saved, it's up my
Yeah. Now we're going to be mainly talking about the period around How Soon Is Now, Meat Is Murder, but I want to say a couple of things about the Smiths at the beginning. I can't get too much into the history, but that's their third gig. The two previous gigs were in the last couple of months. Of the 8 songs that they played on in that show, where they're opening for a Factory Records band called 52nd Street, all 8 would either be on the debut LP or be celebrated B-sides, and 2 of them would be hit singles. Putting that in some additional perspective of how remarkable that is for a group that early in their live format. Andy Rourke, Johnny Marr, and drummer Mike Joyce are all 19. Stephen Morrissey is 23, but he spent the large part of the last 3 years kind of in seclusion at home. And here is a group that's kind of arrived out of the gate pretty much fully formed. There are lots of reasons for that, and they're in the book, but it's remarkable. It doesn't happen too often, and when it does happen, I think the audience just recognizes it. And although the fashion is not quite there at that point, it is for Morrissey with the flowers. You can see it's not quite there for Johnny and Andy, and you'll definitely see that in a minute. But you're seeing a band that has just like arrived and they've got something. And things move at incredible speed for the Smiths, driven in many ways by the fact that Johnny Marr was a very driven person, but he had in Morrissey the partner he always wanted. Morrissey has always credited Johnny's knock on the door that day, the previous June it may have been, as effectively saving his life when Johnny knocked on the door and said, I think you might be a good songwriting partner for me. And they were up and away. They like recorded one of these 8 songs, and they literally said, we want to have this out on Rough Trade. They went down to London. They basically hassled Rough Trade, and Rough Trade took one listen and said, we'll put it out. Things started happening really, really quickly. And I was at the time the same age as Johnny and Andy, same school year. So I was 19 at the time. My fanzine had become a magazine, which made it kind of quite central on the scene. And I do remember people at Rough Trade just being like, we have this band, the Smiths, they're incredible. And Rough Trade did a lot of things at the time, but it wasn't really known for having indie rock bands that could make the charts. I got to see them somewhere around the late summer of '83. I felt very late on the scene. They played my home area of Brixton a couple of times, but I mean, I was busy doing things. I saw them at the Venue on a Rough Trade night. It's called the Venue, and I understood it was incredible. They had an audience already. They had a following. The following had flowers with them. It was teenagers, but it wasn't just like, it was all kinds of teenagers, and it was amazing. And very quickly, with the second single, they took their time to get it right. But with the second single, This Charming Man, they nailed it, and like absolutely nailed it. And the next clip I'm going to show, because we're going to move fast through the early couple of clips. It's I'm going to read from the book. I'm not going to do that too much today, but I'm going to read this part from the book. It will set you up for this clip and the impact that it had. And all of this will make sense, especially once you see the clip. The appearance of the Smiths on Thursday, November 24th, 1983, that's all of 9 months since the gig that you just saw, proved nothing short of a revelation. In fact, it has frequently been cited as one of Britain's most influential moments of music television. It's one that has to be reviewed in context. The Smiths were introduced by the blandest of daytime radio DJs on a week when the top 3 chart positions were held by Billy Joel, Michael Jackson with Paul McCartney, and Shakin' Stevens. They were sandwiched in between Marilyn, a Boy George clone making the most of his brief patronage by the Culture Club star, and the Thompson Twins, who represented everything that the post-punk independent scene had ever sold out. And they performed on a stage lit in multiple hues from underneath and strewn on top with the show's endless barrage of balloons, the reduced pop performance to the level of a child's birthday party, with a disco ball rotating above them. Yet the Smiths were somehow able to transcend this environment and present themselves as precisely what they were, a young 4-piece guitar band steeped in musical tradition. Johnny Marr's rhythmic swaying to his Red Rickenbacker, recalling any number of 1960s acts on the same show. Hip to their own sense of fashion, the 3 playing members mixed Crazy Faces' exclusive black denim jeans with Marks and Spencer's high street polo necks. They were unadorned of pretension and yet with a frontman who instantly stood at odds to everyone else on Top of the Pops that night, or that month, or indeed that year. Morrissey's outfit, his movements, his flowers, all were essentially the same as had been seen on a couple of TV shows previously, as was his unwillingness to stand before a microphone and pretend that this was anything but a lip sync performance. But now it was all being viewed, quite literally, under the searing heat of the national spotlight, that being Top of the Pops, which was watched by about a third of the country at the time. The Smiths appeared entirely comfortable, as if that stage had always been destined for them. I hope you'll agree with me. That's beautiful. That's like utterly beautiful. And if you kind of got it in the context of what I was saying, I mean, maybe it's not David Bowie doing Starman. Maybe it's not quite on that level. But these things come along sort of like, once every many years, where there's an audience watching Top of the Pops that has its minds blown. And the Smiths didn't arrive in a vacuum. No band ever does. They're obviously Manchester, an incredible music city, and there's a lot of things that sort of spoke and went on for them coming along at the right place at the right time. The Jam, which was the group I'd grown up with, had been the biggest band in Britain. They broke up at the end of 1982, and there was a sort of like a search on for like, who might be the next Jam, but people weren't necessarily looking to Manchester. Rough Trade was getting its act together so that it was able to generate a hit single. And, it turned out it was another band playing Rickenbackers and with a 60s influence. But, Morrissey made all the difference. I think you can see how utterly beautiful he is in that early clip. And, he made all the difference for many lyrical reasons that we're going to get into. You might have heard them with These Things Take Time. There's so much in Morrissey's lyrics that when the Smiths sort of hit, that people realized that here was somebody who was actually talking about a section of society that just had not been represented, basically. And to the extent that anybody else was doing it, they might have been doing it to very sort of indie and insular music. But then, Morrissey was backed by this incredible sort of elegiac music that Johnny was creating. Andy Rourke's incredibly funky bass. He was the earth of the band. Mike Joyce got better and better as a drummer. They were phenomenal live. And the impact was really immediate. That period between their debut single and This Charming Man, they'd done a whole bunch of BBC radio sessions. People were tipped off for them. And there was a lot of discussion about their debut album. They became press darlings. There was a lot of discussion. Their debut album was going to be, whatever. And as it so happened at this time, my sort of own life went up a gear. That I was running my magazine. I had my own band that I thought was going to be my thing. But I got invited to co-present on a TV show called The Tube, and it was a hell of an experience. It went out completely live on Friday evenings up in Newcastle. By live, I mean there was no tape delay of any kind. And it had 3 bands performing live, no lip syncing. It was a typically chaotic. It was a very chaotic kind of experience. But my interview with Wham ended up on the Wham documentary on Netflix, and you can kind of see some of that there. And the show was proving really successful in its second season. So they had this great idea of doing an outside broadcast from the Hacienda, which at this point was still just like losing money hand over fist, but that they would also run the show from Newcastle at the same time. So they would now have 2 live shows going on, twice as much chaos. Jules Holland was the main host, and Leslie Ash was the female host that year. I was part of the team that went to Manchester, and because I'd already done stories on Rough Trade, interviewed Elvis Costello for them, they had me do the first ever live interview with Morrissey. It was an incredibly embarrassing moment for reasons you're about to see. And I'm actually going to have fun with it because in recent years, people keep messaging me and saying, oh, this was on TV again last night. It's on like the Sky Arts channel. We saw 19-year-old Tony interviewing Morrissey. And so I'm going to have fun playing this. I am going to tell you what happened up front. you've got to imagine, this was also Madonna's debut ever appearance in the UK. She shared a dressing room with everybody else in Hacienda. They put up those Japanese screens for Madonna. That was the extent that she got. She just got to like hide behind the screen to change. And she did her dance thing on the stage at the Hacienda. And they put together this group, the Factory All Stars, which, thinking about it now, is pretty amazing. And I think what it was, they filmed them for a while. And then what they had agreed is that, like TV, at the exact second, we would be upstairs on the balcony starting our interview, and the sound guy would like mute the sound and the PA, and they could just carry on playing through the monitors. And of course, somebody forgot to do that, namely the sound guy. So you're going to see the fun part of Morrissey and I trying to conduct an interview, which if you've ever tried having a conversation with somebody 4 inches taller than you in a loud nightclub, you will know how hard it is to then imagine it being filmed. But it's great fun for a couple of reasons. There's a couple of reasons it gets reshown a lot over the years.
Currently one of the hottest bands in the country are Manchester's pride and joy, Smith. What's happening? Right, currently one of the hottest bands in the country are Manchester's pride and joy, the Smiths, who are in the charts at the moment with What Difference Does It Make? And I've got here with me Morrissey from the Smiths. Morrissey, you seem to set yourselves apart from the other bands around at the moment. Why is that? What makes you so special?
I think we're very strong-willed and we really know what we want.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right. You, coming from Manchester, which has always been a hotbed of activity, do you still consider there to be a real scene here at the moment?
There is a scene, but I think it's very important to look beyond the scene and to go outside also. Because otherwise you get lost into a little sleep. You have to have very expansive vision.
Right, so you're not really too worried about making yourselves a Manchester band, I'll say?
No, because when you say a Manchester band, it implies really that the group is only known in Manchester. But we want as much scope as possible.
Right. But you still base yourselves here at the moment, don't you?
We still live here.
I believe you've got, obviously you've done very well with the last 2 singles, but I believe that you've got LP coming out soon. Can you tell us about that?
We have an album released on February the 20th, and I really do expect the highest critical praise for it. It's a very, very good album. I think it's a signal post, really, in music.
Do you think that by making sort of statements like that, people are going to start calling you really arrogant? You know?
Yes, I do, but, if you really have something and you're very sure of it, why hide? I don't understand that attitude. No, we're going to take as much as we can.
Right, there's no video for the new single, is there?
No, we really want to bypass the whole video market. I think it's something that's going to die very quickly, and I want to herald the death of that. I think it has nothing whatsoever to do with music, and I want to get back to total music.
Right. Well, you might not have had a video for your last 2 singles, but the Tube at least filmed this charming man. We're going to see some of it now. Here we go.
God, I got to relive the horror even once more. It's actually far enough in the past that I'm no longer embarrassed about that. But I got to tell you, it was like so loud, and I had this like big TV crew there, and they looked as freaked out as me when the sound wasn't muted, because it really was nightclub volumes. Now, the fact of the matter is, the Smiths' debut album was not actually this sort of signal post for music. It's the songs are great. It didn't really gel as an album. Maybe they'd recorded the songs too many times. There's lots of different reasons. So for all its success, for all the fact that the Smiths now had another hit single, it wasn't. It wasn't like a classic. It didn't signal them as more than maybe a great singles band. And it's really what follows on that becomes really, really exciting and interesting. And it's what we're going to talk about for the next hour or so here. The single that then followed after What Difference Does It Make is called Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. And some of you may know it. And it was produced by John Porter, who'd done their album and their previous singles, starting with This Charming Man. And it was engineered by a young guy called Stephen Street, who the group quickly recognized as being very on it. And they sort of took his phone number. Morrissey took his phone number, and he would end up producing Meet His Murder. I always look at Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now as the single that really like proved they had something in them. To me, it's like massively misunderstood. It's one of the funniest songs I've ever heard. I think it's like uplifting. I think it's kind of like joyous, and I think that anybody who's honest with themselves will recognize themselves in a verse like this one. Two lovers entwined passed me by, and heaven knows I'm miserable now. I was looking for a job, and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now. I mean, I have felt both those ways. Not that I've ever really held down a job, but but then again, nor is Morrissey and nor is Johnny Marr. So, you know, some of us were determined not to. I found that thing. The other thing was, we actually didn't know this at the time, that the Smiths had idolized Sandy Shaw. And when Morrissey and Marr first got together, they sat there and they drew up a plan of all the things they wanted to do, like be on Rough Trade with a blue label. They wanted to do this, do that, and they wanted to write a song for Sandy Shaw, and they succeeded on all these fronts within about a year. And Sandy Shaw had a hit single, or minor hit, well, we would have known it, in the 60s called Heaven Knows I'm Missing Him Now. So it was a play on that title, which I think got lost in history. But that single really, really, really elevated them. It hit number 10 in the UK, and I think it showed there was a lot more to the group. And they followed it up. At this point, maybe the musicians would like to at least kind of get up and take their place if they can see anything. They followed it up with a single that would launch what I guess, Johnny Marr said to me, is sort of their imperial phase, which is a phrase he borrowed from Neil Tennant of Pet Shop Boys. But they recorded this single, William, It Was Really Nothing, and it's only 2 minutes long. And so it gave them time for 2 B-sides. And I'm going to show, again, the Top of the Pops clip. Now, it's a shame it's not them playing live. Some bands, very rarely bands did this on Top of the Pops, but it's one of the other, probably the other key appearance by the Smiths on Top of the Pops for the way that Morrissey ends the performance. And I love the song anyway. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hear from this group, who I will give you all their names for certain and let them take a bow at some point. Sheila, take a bow. And we're going to follow straight out of this video clip with the first of the 2 B-sides, and then I'm going to talk at some length about the other B-side, which you may not know in the States as a B-side. So, guys, if you would be ready to play as soon as this finishes, that would be fantastic.
Good time for a change. See the luck I've had to make a good man turn bad. So please
We have three more songs coming by this group, and I am actually I want to mention everybody's names now so that I don't forget later. You would have seen Sam Taylor there on vocals, Ali Argueta on that song is on mandolin, Miles Amerton on all songs is on guitar. That was Noel Fletcher on acoustic guitar. That was Robert Burke Warren on bass. And for the other three songs, Joe Magistro will be on drums. And I have to tell you, this group rehearsed a couple of times at my house for this show. Finally got to use my big music room for a band practice, and it's just been adorable. Like it's really, really, really wonderful, and it speaks to the Smiths' legacy that I know that the songs mean a lot to the younger members of this group as well. Now, so that was the original B-side for the single, and they knocked these two songs off in sort of like half a day. And so they had lots of time because they booked the studio for about 3 days or so. And the song that they came out with is the one that we named this event after. And of course, it's a key song. It's arguably a key song in rock music. And I wrote about its creation extensively in the book. And I kind of want to read from that. I do want to sort of check with a show of hands. Are people here interested when they, in like these great songs about what went into making them? If you are, raise your hand. Good, because you're about to get a real dose of it. How Soon Is Now has an unbelievable backstory, and I may have to like jump ahead. There may be a couple of like really technical references, but I think you're going to get a lot of it. And it's also about the influences that went into the song. I love this stuff, and you can only really do it once or twice in a book, but this was the song to do it on. And so, this next section, I'm going to read about it, and then the group are going to follow up and play it. So here we go. The section is on. Looks like my tag fell. No, there it is. Right. Among the instrumental demos that Johnny Marr had recorded at his flat in Earl's Court in June, this would only be June '84. So Johnny's 20 at this point, was one he entitled Swamp. Once the A and B sides had been fully realized at Jam Studios by the Smiths as a band, then Marr, Rourke, Joyce, and John Porter, the producer, got down to recording it. Morrissey tended only to come in when vocals were required, and by all accounts, the words had not yet been fully constructed for this song. His absence probably allowed the others free rein to indulge their growing experimental tendencies. The session that followed resulted in what would become their most acclaimed song, its unique structure, the result of a particularly complex process that requires a detailed telling. Johnny Marr's writing style, as the two short songs for the initial A and B side exemplified, typically saw him picking his way through the strings with his right hand and instinctively moving a finger here and a finger there on his left hand, creating multiple but subtle chord changes in the process, frequently 2 or more to the measure. Swamp was built around more of a solid strummed riff, close to the conventional chord structures of the blues. This was especially attractive to John Porter, who was, quote, very much into music that didn't have a lot of chord changes, and who saw an opportunity in Swamp to slow the chord progression down further, to keep the initial F-sharp chord going as long as 16 bars rather than the original 4 or 8. Once this idea had been set and multiple ambient microphones set up at varying distances from the drums to magnify the Swamp mood, Porter withdrew to the control room and got the tape running. The atmosphere in the studio was one of hedonistic self-confidence. We used to smoke dope from getting out of bed to going back to bed, said John Porter. Dope being weed, very important for me to tell you that. Or as Johnny Marr put it, it was just like you're from Manchester, you smoke weed till it comes out of your ears. Unlike some other people drawn to the drug, the playing members of the Smiths found that they could still make music while stoned. But it wasn't the only substance at hand. Engineer Mark Wallace recorded the session that followed that we were up at least 2 nights through the day and carried on working through the next day, and that they were able to do so by constant dabbing at a large supply of fish heads. That is, quote, really shit speed. Joyce recorded they even switched the light bulbs out for red ones to further add to the ambience. By Porter and Wallace's recollection, they recorded just a couple of takes of Swamp, but amassed an entire reel of tape in the process, including at least one 15-minute run-through. For the Smiths, the realization that they had created such an epic groove immediately opened up endless possibilities for overdubs. The first and most important addition was the creation of a tremolo effect on the guitars, something that did not exist on the demo. Marr approached it with 3 reference points in his head. One was essentially generic, the Bo Diddley syncopated shuffle. The others were particular to his childhood. The guitar that ran through Hamilton Bohannon's Disco Stomp from 1975, and the twin guitar groove in the instrumental section of the German band Can's surprise British hit of 1976, I Want More. And I invite you to go back to those 2 tracks, particularly the Can one. You'll hear it in the Can track. What the Smiths came away with was something very much of their own creation, and they achieved it by running the initial dry guitar track back out from the studio desk into 3 separate Fender twin reverb amplifiers with the vibrato controls on each one set to create a particular wobble effect. Johnny Marr and John Porter then stood duty at the amps, each mic'd up individually, adjusting the rotary speed knob by hand to keep in time with the track. When their handiwork went out of sync, Wallace would rewind the tape and punch the pair back in, sometimes for as little as 10 seconds at a time. It was a laborious process and worth every painstaking step. The tremolo effect became the song's instant trademark, one of the more recognizable guitar intros in modern history. To ensure a steady beat, Porter had already programmed a rhythm track on the Linn drum, including, he says, a percussion track with shakers and tambourines and congas and cowbells, not instruments that Mike Joyce included as part of his regular arsenal. One of these percussion parts, this is where it gets a little complicated, was now set to 16th beats and used to trigger a Drawmer noise gate captured from the vibrato guitars, creating what Porter called a swirling signal. That's the brief digital pulse that balanced the analog tremolo in effect and in the process ensured the track's meticulous rhythm. These multiple guitar parts were then bounced down onto a couple of stereo tracks so that they became their own instrument. You've got to remember this was pre-digital. You only had X amount of tracks to record on in the studio. Even in a 24-track studio, it's only 24. At some point, the initial 15-minute jam was trimmed and edited down to a more manageable length. Although, given that it was already evident this would not be the typical Smith song, it was still up at the 8-minute mark or so. At that point, recalled Porter, we looked at each other and said, sounds fucking great, let's keep it like that. With the ambitious mood proving contagious, the guitar parts for the song's second of 2 identifiable sections, meaning like kind of what you might call the chorus or the bridge, were now run through a Leslie speaker, typically used for the swirling sound of a Hammond organ. Johnny Marr then added some additional top-end lead guitar flourishes, but with his almost inherent aversion to playing solos, they were kept to a minimum. Recognizing that the track had latched onto something as futuristic as it was nostalgic, the guitar parts were fed into a brand new piece of equipment called an AMS DMX 1580 that was all the rage in studios that could afford it. Marketed as a stereo digital delay and often referred to additionally for its capabilities as a harmonizer, its ability to store what seemed at the time like a magical 1.2 seconds of delay was quickly realized by technicians of the day as a primitive sampler instead, arguably the first of its kind. In fact, John Porter said they invented the sampler by mistake. In this particular example, the brief guitar runs were stored in the DMX, then punched back into the track where needed, a process that in 1984 seemed nothing less than revolutionary. Johnny Marr's demo had incorporated a slide guitar line, albeit a prettier version than the one that John Porter now suggested, which was to play it on the lower strings of the guitar, add a second harmony track, but then to add a couple of additional notes to each of these tracks by using the AMS. Let me skip a little bit. Given that Porter claimed to have played at least one of the slide parts himself, it was perhaps not surprising that he would look back and say, I thought that song was as much mine as it was theirs. Johnny Marr, who disputed that Porter played any guitar parts on this song, nonetheless gives him due credit. He worked incredibly hard on that song. He pieced together all the sonics. It was like he was piloting the plane on that session, which is what a producer does. The final instrumental touch was Johnny Marr's relatively simple melody, the high notes heard at the end of each verse, which he played using the electric guitar's natural harmonics. An almost precise replica of the synthesized vibraphone sound heard loudly on Lovebug Starsky's 1983 12-inch You've Gotta Believe. This was Marr's nod to Starsky as both a distant hip-hop influence and an immediate welcoming presence when the Smiths appeared at Danceteria in New York. They'd been there already, only to New York, but they'd been to New York and played Danceteria. Such subtle notations were his way of countering the Smiths' public perception as 60s revivalists and rock purists. That's the dun 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 part, which I went back and listened to the Lovebug Starsky track just yesterday. It's exact. It's really cool. Morrissey, of course, had much to do with this image of the Smiths as 60s revivalists and rock purists. His negative proclamations about synthesizers and other studio trickery had sounded suspiciously close to a fatwa. But that was the beauty about the Smiths, that what seemed at times like diametrically opposed forces could find a common musical ground, the resulting combination of which could then appeal to all comers. Morrissey, who was often fulsome in his praise for his bandmates' musical compositions, would rarely reveal his true feelings for this, the Smiths' most experimental club-based track to date. But he knew that they were working on Swamp and had long been tinkering with prospective lyrics. Porter, as was often his custom, dropped a cassette tape of the 8-minute mix through the singer's letterbox on his way home after this lengthy session. And when Morrissey returned to the studio with his book of prospective lyrics, he delivered his most emotive and personal vocal yet. After borrowing his opening lines from George Eliot's Middlemarch, Morrissey met the group's dark dance floor groove head on, singing of a nightclub where, if you'd like to go, you could meet someone who really loves you. Except, of course, that in his case, precisely the opposite happens. The protagonist leaves on her own, as always, forlorn and suicidal. It may have been mere coincidence, given that it formed part of a longer lyrical theme of resistance to unseen forces, that Morrissey should have chosen this track with all its digital trickery to insist, I am human and I need to be loved. But the effect was the same, regardless. It sounded as if his very life, or indeed his death, depended on it. Between the painstaking but euphoric construction of the backing track and the meticulous but cathartic delivery of the vocals, the Smiths had created something quite unlike and totally beyond themselves. As with several other songs they were working on at the time, the song was awarded a title that had not once been uttered in the actual lyrics. How Soon Is Now. I join you on all that applause. It's fantastic. Really. So you would think, so there's a couple of things to say here. That How Soon Is Now comes out in the UK. Initially, they're not sure that Rough Trade particularly like it. And so they release William It Was Really Nothing as a 7-inch with Please, Please, Please on the back of it. And then for the 12-inch, they put How Soon Is Now on it as a bonus cut. And I remember being in the jamming office, and we get the new Smith single, and some people may have heard the A-side already, but like, let's put this 12-inch on, and we put on this bonus cut, and it's like, what the, it was like, oh my God, this is uncharted territory. This is just amazing. And then our reaction was sort of, just as fans and music journalists, and everybody's reaction was, what the hell is this doing as a bonus cut on a B-side? And the Smiths quickly realized this as well. They had like this was just a seminal track, and they basically given it away to those people who were going to buy the 12-inch. I mean, not even on the 7-inch. And all of a sudden, this is like part of the very bad business decisions the Smiths would make, but they were also sort of prided themselves on not being business people. They were pretty much managerless their entire career. At this point, the reason they were managerless is Morrissey didn't like having managers. And the person, I know that sounds funny, the person who was really holding it together for them at the time was a guy called Scott Peering, an American. Lovely guy. He was the sort of plugger, the publicist at Rough Trade, and he had really taken the Smiths under their wing. I remember he's the one who just was like absolutely pounding me about them, and he was operating a very sort of difficult dual role of being their radio plugger, an employee of Rough Trade, and effectively looking after their, trying to run their day-to-day business without any kind of contract with them. And so it's not surprising they made those kind of mistakes. But in the meantime, William was a hit single. Everybody's going, wow, How Soon Is Now? And the band haven't been to America to tour yet, but the first album had come out in the States and was doing very well. There was lots of interest in them. What they did around this point in time is recognizing the debut album had been a bit disappointing, that some of the early radio sessions had been better, that they'd done all these B-sides and 7-inch singles. They put out a double album. No, it was a long single album, right, called Hatful of Hollow. It's a compilation. So their second album is actually a compilation. And that started doing really well in the States on import. And radio stations in America, I've got this whole section here about, quote, modern rock radio, but it wasn't called that at the time. That term didn't come into use till '88, but there was this whole new radio emerging in America, and they kind of latched on to How Soon Is Now anyway. Now, in the meantime, the Smiths were ready to make their second album, and you would think that they would, after turning out these great songs, keep using John Porter. But instead, effectively, Morrissey turns to Johnny Marr and says, you know, you can produce this album. And he says that in terms of confidence. You can produce the Smiths. And so they call that engineer Stephen Street. And if his name's not really well known in the States, he produced a lot of great Britpop stuff, a lot of the big Blur records, a lot of fantastic records. And this was his first ever kind of like, you know, we're lifting you up to engineer an album kind of session. And so they hired Stephen Street, and the madness around the Smiths with the sudden success they'd had, they'd all moved to London for a while. And they made the decision, like, time to move back. They'd moved to London to try and be on top of the record company deal, some of the publicity, but they moved back. They brought Stephen up to Liverpool instead, where they recorded at a place called Amazon Studios, which Echo and the Bunnymen had used a lot. I think, I don't have the exact quote here, it's in the book, but Johnny Marr describes it as, you know, it's still a bleak northern studio on a shitty industrial estate. And I've been there. It's kind of a nice studio, but like a lot of studios, yeah, it's on a shitty industrial estate. So it's nothing glamorous. They bring Stephen Street up, and they start working on the album that would become Meat Is Murder, which is really, you know, the crux of what we're talking about today. This breakthrough record, this album that would define the band and establish them as an albums act, as a really, really great band. And effectively, you've got a 20-year-old songwriter and an engineer who's Morrissey's age, that's about 24, producing the album. And they do wonders with it. To me, it is a very northern record. I mean, Morrissey said at the time, I think the way I write is very northern. You know, I grew up in London, but I was born in the north, so I've got one foot in each camp. And it is very northern, and yet the Smiths audience was international. And I always think that's one of the beautiful things about the Smiths, that while they can have songs that reference the north of England, they were just as popular in other parts of the country. And in other parts of the world. And in fact, I've got a great quote in the book from the guy in the Decemberists. I actually took it from somewhere else. But he talks about how some of Morrissey's lyrics and songs could have been him in rural Montana. And I think he includes How Soon Is Now among that these themes were universal. Hopefully many of you know the album, Meat Is Murder. I'm trusting that you do. There was, if not, I've noticed there are several of these self-appointed music philosophers and experts on YouTube who have, you know, dedicated shows about, like, you know, why Meat Is Murder matters, why Meat Is Murder is so important. And I don't argue with any of them for having that kind of overarching statement to it. And you know, one of them, and I did find this kind of interesting. He was talking about, you know, how the album has this sort of theme of violence in it. And there is some truth to that. The album opens with the Headmaster Ritual, with one of the great opening lines of any song anywhere, actually. Belligerent ghouls run Manchester schools. It's just such a great Morrissey couplet of a guy who was never short of them. And it continues that way in many ways, like through the album. And yet at the time, I don't recall that necessarily being the discussion. As somebody who grew up in the UK, it was just violence all the time, everywhere. Like, the UK just was violent. And so what the Smiths were really doing was just singing about life as it was. I mean, if it was all unicorns and rainbows in the UK, they would have sung about that. But I can tell you that cities like Manchester in the 80s, when Thatcher's, you know, literally carving the heart out of the working class, and manufacturing has died. The Smiths recorded Meat Is Murder at the time that the miners' strike was going on, which precipitated and kind of had a low-grade civil war going on at the picket lines, with the kind of state violence that you know needs to be discussed in any conversation about violence. You need to discuss state-sponsored violence, and I witnessed some of that. I even sort of went to some of those pits firsthand to write about them. So that's the culture that the Smiths are sort of emerging from, and yet they're essentially very happy people having the time of their life. And again, I think this kind of incredible combination comes across in the music. And we're going to actually move on with the music again. We're going to have another song coming up in just a moment. And then I'm going to talk more about the album. But I've got a little clip. This clip is only 40 seconds long. So I'd like to get the musicians up and ready for it if they could. And there was obviously a lot of publicity about the Smiths at the time. And there's a couple of TV interviews. And I went through them all and tried to just select a couple of good clips. It was Morrissey who did the talking for the band. Johnny would often be with him in interviews, but usually he'd let Morrissey do the talking. Johnny was very happy being the musician in the group. The relationship was just like this. Johnny is telling me they had to see each other every single day. It was just like they were just on fire. And this clip is going to just get some of this across, and then you've got another song that Morrissey will introduce for you. Of course, it would help if we had the sound. I can't explain it. This was all set up when I got here. I'm going to try again. That's Mike Joyce staring at the camera. It's the BBC's Old Grey Whistle test.
There are songs about pro-vegetarianism, there's songs about anti-monarchy. Is there anything in life worse than a meat-eating member of the royal family then? Or?
Certainly not, no, I don't think so, but I'm on the lookout for something. I'll let you know if I find anything.
What other songs?
Yes.
What other songs, what are the rest of them about?
Yes, there's a song called R.E.M Ruffians about going to a fair and being stabbed. Fairs in Manchester, fun fairs in Manchester, are very violent things. These things where communities get together for fun and frolics, etc. And somebody always ends up being stabbed, and which of course adds to the...
It adds to the excitement. I guess we cut that 1 second short. It adds to the excitement.
Money is right, Julia hangs every naked gully wide. She
so much fun. So great having this music here and the groups. You know, seeing and hearing the legacy of the Smiths and the fact that there's a couple of us up here on the stage who are old enough to have seen the Smiths, and there are many people on the stage who are not. And I was fortunate enough to see the Smiths several times. We're good for now. Yeah. It'll be I'll wrap it on for just a little bit longer. I was fortunate enough to see the Smiths several times, and every one of those times was utterly incredible. I also actually had the pleasure of introducing them to perform live on the Tube. There aren't enough live TV clips of the Smiths. They, for some reason, which I didn't really get to the bottom of, they seem to prefer lip syncing on TV, and there wasn't an awful lot of live film, but we're going to show a clip from 1985 a little bit later. I actually think Rush Home Ruffians, despite the lyrical content, you know, the same way that Morrissey introduced that, I always got a sort of sense of humour from that. And I've never found, you know, I've always been able to balance the fact that the Smiths would sing about dark and difficult and uncomfortable subjects. And yet I never found that depressing. I just found it like honest and refreshing. I really, really did, and nothing's ever really made me change my mind on that. There are lyrics that come up further down the line where Morrissey gets sort of like, you know, he actually writes one of the best songs later down the line about suicide, which is a very, very difficult subject to write about, and I think he does it with just unbelievable, I guess the word would be empathy. And so, you know, I just want to get that point across. I also want to hold up the cover to Meet His Murder. You know, it's important to say that when this record came out, you know, you look at an album cover like this, it's the picture is of a American GI in Vietnam who had actually written, ironically, on his helmet, "Make war, not peace." And Morrissey was the one who wanted to change it for this. And when you see this, it really like looks like a independent record album that is not that far removed from all the other independent records coming out in the UK that didn't sell a lot of copies. The fact of the matter is that when this album came out in the UK, it dislodged Born in the USA from #1 in its first week, and it was certified gold on the day of release, which means it sold 100,000 copies the day it came out in the UK, which is, you know, not the size of the USA. So that gives you a sense of the group's popularity in the UK. And of course, there's the album title. And as I've said on a couple of radio interviews this week, these days we tend to sort of just mention the album title. Yeah, Meet His Murder. And it could be as simple as, you know, like cows are animals. I mean, you know, blah, blah, blah. And yet at the time, to have an album with that kind of title and with that kind of statement, even on its own, it's the kind of thing you might have expected Crass to do, the anarcho-punk scene that was very influential in the UK and in the States. But it's not the album title you would expect of a record that's going to dislodge Born in the USA from #1. And I want to give Morrissey further time to talk about this. He talked about it on that same interview with the whistle test that I just showed. But this is him sitting down with Muriel Gray from a Scottish show called Studio One. Muriel Gray was one of the other like second-tier co-hosts on the Tube with me, but she was older, way more experienced than me. I think the fact that I laughed through these sound issues was something I couldn't do when we had that sound calamity at the Hacienda. That was Morrissey's first national TV interview, so it was quite a big deal at the time. So she's sitting down with Morrissey and talking about Meet His Murder, the title. I make no apologies or excuses for what you're about to see.
But I mean, I realise you're a vegetarian, have been for some years, but why do you feel the necessity to get on a soapbox lyrically?
Well, because this is something which has never been covered, and never been covered certainly in music, or at any rate successfully. And it's something that gets no national attention whatsoever. Everybody's politically aware, there are benefit concerts, there are benefit records, etc. But this is something that people never ever talk about, and I felt that since there were so many people who felt strongly about it, that it really should have its place in music.
Right, well, let's have a look at it. This is Meet His Murder.
Everyone could figure
succulent, tasty or kind. It's death for no reason, and death for no reason is murder. And the cards that you carve with a smile, it is murder. And the turkey you festively slice, it is murder.
Well, that's the Smiths track Meat is Murder, obviously, which put some rather disturbing images over. Now, I know vegetarianism is thought to be a good thing, but isn't it mankind being a little vain to think that we're not part of the food chain? Do you see what I mean? Every animal has to kill to live, even if it's just plants.
Animals do, human beings don't. It's unnecessary. People survive without meat. It's just really ignorance, I think, and certain... people eat meat, I think, for negative reasons.
What do you think those reasons are?
They just really can't be bothered to think about animal cruelty, or they can't be bothered to think of another diet. I mean, it's too much trouble for people to really sit down and think, well, if I didn't eat this, what could I possibly eat? People just, food is just this ritual. Breakfast is toast, dinner it's meat and whatever. So it's just really, people have to be made aware of the situation, really. Most people don't know any details about vegetarianism or animal slaughter.
It's always been associated with a young person's thing, vegetarianism anyway, hasn't it? Back in the 60s as well.
Yes.
You're obviously still just appealing to young people, but how do you think you're going to get this over to the older generation?
Well, if the message can be really cemented within the younger generation, I think that's enough. Everything else should hopefully just come in time. But I think it's wishful thinking to try and do too much at once. So I know from the letters I receive hundreds of letters every single day from people who've said, we heard this record and now we're vegetarian. So it's a success.
Right, for the moment, Mark.
Obviously, the interview goes on from there, but that was the point that I kind of wanted Morrissey to have a chance to get across. And I think it sort of, I was just back in the UK. I actually spent a lot of the 2025 in the UK, and it is so unbelievably easy to get vegetarian and vegan food anywhere in that country now, the country I come from. But I think you get a sense when you see these interviews that this was considered like not just rebellious, but sort of like strange and arguably sort of revolutionary, and demanded explanation and demanded challenging on all fronts. And I was one of among many people, as you know, I said I'm the same age as three of the Smiths. So I was one amongst many people that there was a culture sort of going on. And when this album came out, they would play with the song "Meat Is Murder," which is about 6-7 minutes long. There would be 6 or 7 minutes of abattoir footage portrayed behind the stage. And it was very, very, very effective. And it was effective on me. I'd been sort of looking for like that final push to go vegetarian. And the Smiths really, really helped give that to me. And I owe them a lot of credit for that. There was a defining incident that happened with just somebody that I just was like, well, if he can get by, I can get by. And I never looked back. I never ever looked back, and so I want to give the Smiths credit for that. I've been vegan for a number of years, and at the point that Morrissey was making these points, he wasn't being as strict as he's been in recent years. Where I was watching an interview with Stephen Colbert that's from 2012, and he demanded the entire TV building be like meat-free for the day. Back at the time doing this interview and the Whistle Test one, he was just saying to people, I just want people to think, I just want people to like know what's involved. And it really, really, really did have an effect. And the tour that I saw in 1985, Scott Peering actually took me up to the show in Oxford because they were headlining Royal Albert Hall, and being rough trade, they ran out of free tickets for the press. So he drove me up to the Oxford Apollo, which was being recorded for radio. And it was one of the, I really hope everybody here has been able and been fortunate enough at one time in their lives to see a band utterly, or a solo artist, at the peak of their powers. And it's a wonderful experience because you kind of know it. And that show, it was in a seated theatre. Nobody was in their seats. Most of the people seemed to be on the stage at all times. Like the Smiths was just stage invasion after stage invasion. If the kids weren't trying to hug Morrissey, they just wanted to dance with the band. And the band liked to dance. It was just this utterly, utterly beautiful pandemonium. And what I've heard of that show, it captures that to some degree, but we're not going to play a clip from that because it was only radio. I want to just go through the songs on Meter's Murder. Now, this is the British album. This is actually my original copy, I do believe. Actually, no, it's not for some reason. Okay, it's an American copy. But it doesn't have one particular song in it. So you got the Headmaster Ritual, Rush Home Ruffians, I Want the One I Can't Have, What She Said, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, Nowhere Fast, Well I Wonder, Barbarism Begins at Home, and Meat is Murder. There is not a genuine hit single on there, and which to me makes the album all the better. In the UK, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore would eventually come out as a single, but not before the Smiths in the UK managed to really shoot themselves in the foot. They were very excited about a new song they'd recorded, so in the fashion of the Beatles, who would often release a different single on the same day as an album. When Meat is Murder came out in the UK, the same week they released a single called Shakespeare's Sister. In the meantime, How Soon Is Now was developing this incredible afterlife, and in the States it was taking off. So 6 weeks after Shakespeare's Sister, they released How Soon Is Now. And it's actually possible I've even got that the wrong way around, but it was so convoluted. And they thought How Soon Is Now edited down would be like a massive radio song, and it wasn't in the UK, which is a great disappointment. And then they released That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, and British radio started being like, whoa, you can't release singles every 6 weeks, which is what they were doing, and expect us to be on top of it. And at which point Morrissey started getting very upset with Rough Trade and with radio and thinking there was a vendetta against the Smiths. There was nothing of the sort, but that maybe speaks of problems that were coming down the line. In the meantime, many of you in the States will be like, but hang on, How Soon Is Now is track 1 on side 2 of Meat is Murder. Well, American record companies have no real qualms about these things. They heard How Soon Is Now. They recognized what it was doing at radio on its own as an import. They then serviced it to radio, and Seymour Stein and Sire Records went, it's opening track side 2, whether you like it or not. The Smiths hated it. And yet when I interviewed Johnny Marr, he had this very they did the wrong thing. We hated them for it. It ruined the aesthetic. It was not the same producer, the same studio, and it broke us in America. And additionally, I know loads of people who turned vegetarian as a result of hearing How Soon Is Now and buying that album. So, there's that yin-yang, there's that kind of just the way the world can work at times, and it can be a very interesting thing like that. There were some really humorous songs on the album. I do like From What She Said. I've always loved the lyric about the protagonist in that song. This is a particular line. What she read, all heady books she'd sit and prophesize. It took a tattooed boy from Birkenhead to really, really open her eyes. And also, opening the second verse of Nowhere Fast, I'd like to drop my trousers to the Queen. Every sensible child will know what this means. The poor and the needy are selfish and greedy on her terms. And as you may well know, the Smiths made one more fantastic studio album called The Queen is Dead. And then they made one album after that called Strange Ways, Here We Come, which I think signaled that it could have been one of those albums that leads you to the next stage in your career, but there wasn't a next stage in the career. I was hoping to have time to just play this clip. I think we can just about do this. We just about got time to play this clip. Very little live footage of the Smiths from at all, let alone from 1985. They would tour the United States, and it was chaotic and brilliant and pandemonious, and they would come back in 86 and already be playing arenas in the States. That's how quickly they broke. How Soon Is Now had much to do with that. The American record company also disregarded what Morrissey said to me on the tube back then and simply made a video for How Soon Is Now and put it out and effectively told the band, done deal. Sorry, we didn't tell you. And again, it helped break the band in America. This was recorded in Madrid for a TV show. It's outdoors in Madrid on a festival for a patron saint, of which I believe there are many in Spain. And it came at the end of a long day of classic Smith shenanigans. They had managed to hire a lawyer, and a letter landed on Rough Trade's doorstep that morning saying that the Smiths were terminating their contract, which they had no legal basis for. Various members of Rough Trade flew out to confront the Smiths. The Smiths checked in and out of various hotels to avoid such confrontations. And then they pulled off a great show. So this is what she said. It's about 2 minutes long. And coming out of this, we're going to have the musicians back up to play one more song.
Shot, I'd probably jump in the ocean, and when the train goes by, it's such a sad sound. It's such a sad thing. I'd like to drop my trousers to the queen. Every sensible child will know what this means. The poor and the needy are selfish and greedy on her turn. Little day came when I felt a natural emotion. I get such a shock I'd probably jump in the ocean. And when a train goes by, it's such a sad sound. It's such a sad thing. And when I'm lying in my bed, I think about life and I think about death. And neither one particularly appeals to me. And the day came when I felt a natural emotion. I get such a shock I'd probably lie in the middle of the street and die. Thank you.
And again, you see from that the just how big the Smiths got, how quickly. And so what we're going to do, I want to just say, the Smiths did, of course, break up after the 4 studio albums. And in that way, there's a lot of similarities with groups like the Jam, like the Clash, other singular syllable British band names. We can want for more, but what they left us was incredible. And when I wrote this book, I added up the number of Morrissey and Marr compositions recorded in their 5 years, from 83 through 87. And I think it was pretty much exactly the same number as the number of Lennon and McCartney songs recorded in the first 5 years of the Beatles' career. And there's no duds. I mean, there's one or two I like less than others, but there's no duds. It's utterly phenomenal. So there are 9 songs on that album. One of them was the earliest track. It was actually they performed it live when I introduced them on the Tube in like March 1984, when the first album had only just come out. So they were really ready to go with this, and some of it's a throwback in a way to a sound that Johnny and Andy had in a previous band that was pretty funky. We're going to follow this. Some of these musicians need to go and play more music tonight for the Rock Academy. So there's a best of season at the Woodstock Playhouse for the Rock Academy, which I directed shows at right up until this past season. I had most incredible several years doing so. So they're welcome to just pick up their guitars and leave. We'll do a Q&A up till 4 o'clock. I'm sorry it can't be longer. And I'm going to just say, if you feel like standing up and dancing, go for it, because I probably will. All right? This is Barbarism Begins at Home.
Taken in hand. Unruly girls who will not settle down, they must be taken in hand. A crack on the head is what you get for not asking, and a crack on the head is what you get for asking. Woo! Unruly boys who will not grow up must be taken in hand. Unruly girls who will not settle down, they must be taken in hand. A crack on the head is what you get for not asking, and a crack on the head is what you get for asking. On the head is what you get for not asking, and a crack on the head is what you get for not asking. A crack on the head is just what you get, while that's just as who you are. And a crack on the head is just what you get, why, well, because of who you are. A crack on the head because of the things you said, the things you did. Unruly boys who wanna go, they must be taken in hand. Unruly girls who wanna go must be taken in hand. Oh, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. No. No, no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No. No, no, no. No. No.
stage for a moment. Noel Fletcher, Sam Taylor, Ali Argueta, Miles Amerton, Robert Burke-Warren, and Joe Magistro. It was such a pleasure having that live music here today. Please raise your hand, and I will try and pick you out. There in the end of the third from back row. Yeah, Oscar Wilde, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. So the question is about the group's Irish heritage, and so I got both praise and criticism for this book, and some of the criticism was that the Smiths don't form until about page 200. But if you want to read about Manchester and Manchester's Irish connections, this is the book. 7 of the 8 Smiths' parents were, if you know, like 2 parents per member, of course, were actually from Ireland. So that made 3 of the band like first-generation British in their family. The Irish influence was absolutely enormous on them. It's very big in Manchester and Liverpool alike, but maybe bigger in Manchester. There's a rivalry between the cities for a lot of different reasons, and it does include the Industrial Revolution. It includes their different roles in slavery. When I was researching the history of the Irish in Manchester, you know, it's almost unconscionable about what people would say about the Irish back at the time. So are the standards, conditions in which they had to live. But the various members of the Smiths, their parents had literally come over in recent years and were part of a different sort of influx, maybe a sort of post-war influx into the UK. Johnny Marr had a very young mum, I think she was like 19 when he was born. So you've got these different parents, but I would invite you to read the book and get more of that, because there's a lot of history of that, and a lot of history about Manchester, which Manchester was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it just was. It was, which means it was the birthplace of a lot of modern capitalism, which means it was the birthplace of a lot of economic inequality. And it was also, the birthplace effectively of the trade union movement. It was the birthplace of communism to quite some degree, given that Engels had inherited a mill up there, and he and Karl Marx spent a lot of time at the library in Manchester researching and writing. I think it was Das Kapital, if not the Communist Party manifesto. And an incredible city with incredible musical history. These days, it's long felt like not even Britain's second city. It often feels like Britain's first city, and it's become a place where a lot of people want to go to college there, and understandably so. It had a lot of rough times going on. The early 80s was full of heroin use all across Britain. Manchester was in a terrible way. All these brutalist, we call them council estates, and the high-rise flats were just really, really, really dangerous. And nowadays, Manchester is much more thriving. But I went there to see the Jam in 1980 with my best friend. We were 16, and I was friends with the Jam, so I knew we could get on the guest list. And I asked my friend to come because I knew the last bus back was around the time the Jam went on stage. And we just figured that we'd find a way to get through the night. We actually walked the streets of Manchester all night. We were 16, and somehow we made it onto the first bus back in the morning. But man, it was a bleak, depressing place at that point. Maybe we were lucky. We stayed in the city centre and just kept walking and walking and walking. We eventually found an all-night cafe and discovered about Ladies of the Night in the process when they came in to discuss their business with the guys who were just getting up. Anyway, it's a different story. Next question. I think we do have a microphone for you.
Thanks.
Sure.
What I don't remember reading it in the book, so maybe you can expand on it. They were obviously aware with the '60s girl pop groups and German groups and everything, but what was their awareness to hip hop?
Oh,
Because they've
yeah.
sampled not just musically but lyrically. He's sampling left and right from every writer, and I'm just curious, like,
Yeah,
were they aware of that other sampling thing across the states, or
yeah,
like,
I think
how
that's
does that
another
play out?
like equally important thing to ask, and again, some of that's in the book. The very early '80s, and Johnny was really keen to get this across. The very early '80s, there were like two 1980s out there. There's a sort of MTV 1980s. And then there's a different 1980s that people were living, which was partly like post-punk music, which was when it was getting really interesting. And you're in Manchester, and Factory Records is getting going. And Factory Records is very much into dance music. And you've got this electro, particularly coming over from New York City. I think that was really what we had coming over. And that was going on in London. We had these Street Sounds compilations. It was going on in Manchester. The Hacienda gets built. And, so like nobody went for several years, but the Hacienda gets built. Joy Division, Ian Curtis sadly kills himself. New Order, embrace electro. And a lot of that was this sort of electro thing. People really did understand. And I think the fact that I was saying about the way that Johnny literally plays the same melody as that Love Buck Starsky track makes it very clear there was a massive amount of New York music coming to Manchester, and there are people in Manchester, they have a degree of deserved confidence in themselves that they weren't looking to London. They would often be looking to New York for influential music, and that's a really key point. I'm not sure how much early hip hop got across. I know that, I remember hearing The Message for the first time around late '82 by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. One of those tracks that just blows your mind if you haven't heard it before, and it's 1982. But the difference is Morrissey was Morrissey. He was a literate, solitary person who chose his friends very carefully. He had friends, chose them very carefully, didn't announce, I should say, his relationships, and didn't really announce his sexuality either. And then you had these three younger guys who were just like, young, beautiful, handsome people, very straight, very much on the scene. And Johnny and Andy were both very much into the dance music. And Johnny worked in central Manchester in a clothes shop run by the Smiths' original manager, and he was spending his time at dance nights. Andy Rourke, in the early Smiths footage, you can see it. He's got his bass up high. He's got the sweaters on. He's like a jazz funketeer. That's why he brings the funk. So while I don't know it's so much like hip hop, I would say that New York music, electro, the fact that they opened for a group called 52nd Street at that Hacienda show, that those members of the Smiths were very on that. But a little like R.E.M. had a similar thing going between Michael Stipe, who, for example, loved making videos and the rest of the band didn't, and had a sort of artiness to him that the rest of them didn't. Morrissey was the literate person. The others were, not saying they weren't literate at all, and I don't want to get that across, but they were, they were different. Morrissey would make some comments about black music along the way that were negative and derogatory, and which was strange because when he and Johnny Marr first bonded, they bonded over singles by the Marvelettes, and they had this deep love of Motown, etc. But Morrissey did find it harder to embrace other musics other than the sort of 60s pop music, and over the years I think that would lead to them spreading apart. And it's not a surprise that Johnny Marr went off and formed Electronic after the Smiths and really embraced the acid house scene that really originated in the UK as much as in Manchester as in London, and Morrissey carried on being Morrissey, but more so. which, well, he did. Another question? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Joe.
Yeah, I mean, who guessed? And I haven't read the book yet, even though you just gave it to me. But given what you just said about Morrissey being the artsy, like, introvert, and earlier saying that Johnny Marr was highly driven, the thing that struck me from that first clip you played, and I'm wondering how much of this was calculated by Johnny Marr, if at all, is you guys had technical problems. Yeah, Morrissey's, it's their third gig. I mean, and I've played with really great frontmen. Like, he has it.
He does, doesn't he?
And the composure, and it's like it was his 2000th interview. Like,
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how much of that was in Johnny Marr's thinking. Like, here's the point guy. Like, aside from a songwriting partner, the personality.
I think that Morrissey talks about, like, I was almost dying and Johnny came along and saved me. And I think what it was is Morrissey had so much of this bottled up for years upon years upon years of wanting this opportunity and it not being realized. And he tried his hand at groups and the scene, the Manchester scene, all scenes are pretty small. And they're like, oh God, it's Morrissey again. There was that kind of thing. He and Tony Wilson of Factory had a pretty, tempestuous relationship in a way. And so I think that for Morrissey, it was just like, this is my moment. I have been waiting for this. And there is a beauty, and I guess Johnny and Morrissey must have talked together so much that Morrissey just, he didn't mess those opportunities up. He was entertaining in interviews. He knew what to say, when to deliver the words. You're quite right. He was very composed. I have one other memory of that tube thing. I talked to Johnny about it. I was pretty nervous. Like, I'm the Londoner in the room. This is Manchester. I'm on, like, foreign football territory. This is the big hacienda. I'm interviewing Morrissey, who's a pop star. I am not. This is not even, Jules Holland's the main person on this show. And I remember that the Smiths coming in sort of early in sound check thing, and this is now not even in a TV studio, it's in the nightclub. And they came in like the South Park kids. They didn't show up separately, they came in together. And they all shuffled around the hacienda, like together, like this absolute little gang that they were. You could see that they were really inseparable. And I don't know where the other three were when Morrissey and I were trying to talk about the sound of various, literally all stars on the stage down there, various members of New Order in a certain ratio and what have you, but they were somewhere together. And I think all of that comes across. I think it is so rare, and this may be the final word, it is so rare that people bond like that. I love this about all groups. We all love it about the Beatles, and I love The Who, and I love R.E.M, and all these groups. And it's easier in a way with like a four-piece group. You can sort of understand it, the earth, air, wind, fire business. But I think when two people who are opposites meet and their worlds can intersect for a number of years and they make beautiful music together in a purely musical sense, and they help change people's lives for the better. And then, you can almost tell all the way down the line, they are different people, Morrissey and Marr. They will end up choosing different paths. But for those 5 years, like Johnny says, until the last 2 weeks, it was great, and a slight exaggeration maybe, but pretty much all of that time, they did incredible stuff. And, they each recognized in each other that there was somebody who could make them what they wanted to be, could make them whole, could make them the person they believed they could be. And we are all the better for it. And I think that might be the way to leave that today. I'll see some of you downstairs, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the musicians, and thank you to Upstate Films for putting this stuff on and doing such an amazing job with it. Thank you.